Hey everyone. Tonight we're heading far out, past the shipping lanes, beyond radar reach, into a part of the Pacific no sane map dares to mark. Picture this, midnight waves, black as spilled ink, rolling over a dormant island that shouldn't even exist. There's no light, no birdsong, only an unsettling vibration, like the ocean's heartbeat just skipped. That's where I was, on a rust-bitten trawler with one radar dish and a cooler full of Red Bulls. Chasing a signal no one could explain. I was there not as a scientist. Not exactly. More like an obsessed former researcher who couldn't quite let go of what the world dismissed as myth. But when the tremors started, so subtle they dodged tsunami sensors, I knew something below the crust had stirred. So before you feel like the mystery needs to be solved right away, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And hey, post your location and local time below. I love seeing where you all are tuning in from. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soft noise, and let's get started on tonight's mystery. So, this island, it was just a blip, a landmass that didn't exist on 90% of the satellite maps, like it had appeared overnight. We anchored offshore, and even the crew, guys who survived freak cyclones and pirate radio, refused to go further. I didn't blame them. There was something ancient in the air. Like time didn't apply here. The clouds above were low and slow, dragging shadows across the water like lazy fingers. I stepped off alone, my boots crunched on obsidian black sand. Still warm despite the hour. Something had stirred beneath the island recently. The readings confirmed it, tremors echoing from a trench so deep it made the Mariana look like a kiddie pool. And the pattern of those tremors, yeah, they weren't random. 3 pulses, a pause, 2 short bursts. Then silence, over and over, not tectonic, not volcanic, intentional. At the center of the island, there was a lagoon, dead silent, filled with water too still to trust. That's when I heard it. A low hum, not a sound, really, a frequency. It vibrated through my bones, like an orchestra tuning up below my heartbeat. I dropped to my knees without meaning to. Not from fear, from instinct. Now, you know how old sailors say animals can sense storms before they hit? There's wisdom in that, old truth. If the birds leave, you should too. Well, there were no birds here to begin with. Just me, and the growing sense that I wasn't alone. Not in the paranoid, someone's following me way, in the you just stepped on a whale's back kind of way. So I did what any academically self-destructive person would do. I set up my gear and pinged sonar into the trench. Not once, not twice, but continuously for 3 hours. And I swear on my old professor's dusty collection of trilobites, something answered. At first, it was faint, like echolocation, but too complex. Not just, I'm here. No, it was more like, I know you're listening. And that's when I first said the word out loud. Just a whisper. Godzilla. Let's go off topic for a second. Did you know cuttlefish can camouflage themselves with dynamic patterns based on what they're looking at? That's right. They adjust their skin in real time using vision-driven neural feedback loops. Tiny ocean aliens. Basically, keep that in mind, because we're going to come back to creatures that adapt, not with brute force, but neural processing. Anyway, I didn't sleep that night. Didn't even try. Just stared into the lagoon, hoping I wasn't losing it. Around 3 a.m., something massive shifted far below. The water rippled, once, and then stilled. And then I felt it again. That hum, this time stronger, like it was inside my skull. You know when you're standing under a huge speaker and the bass makes your bones vibrate? That, but, inside my thoughts, I heard no words, no voice, but a feeling settled over me like fog, ancient patience, weightless dominance, not hunger, awareness. I scrambled back to my equipment, eyes wide. My laptop had picked up a pattern, spikes in electromagnetic fields in response to my own sonar. It wasn't random. Godzilla's brain, if that's what I was detecting, was responding to stimulus. Not by reflex, by decision. That's when I remembered something my grandmother used to say, still water holds secrets deeper than storms. It made no sense when I was 12. It made too much sense now. And just like that, the island went silent again. No tremors, no echoes. Just the sense that something had opened one sleepy eye, looked around, and decided, for now, to go back to sleep. But it was awake, partially, and it had noticed me. You ever get the feeling that something enormous is watching you from below? Not just metaphorically, I mean really. physically below you, under miles of water and pressure and ancient silence. That was me, 36 hours later, strapped inside a deep-sea submersible we'd barely patched together with parts from 3 other machines that didn't survive their last dives. I know, sounds like the start of a horror movie. Spoiler alert, it felt exactly like one. The water pressure kicked in fast. At 500 feet, the sunlight vanished. At 1.000, my ears started popping. At 2.300, the sonar began pinging back a strange kind of density, like pockets of organic mass. But not fish, not anything alive, like memories fossilized in salt. And then I heard it again. Not a sound, more like a pulse. Rhythmic, deep, less like a heartbeat now, and more like something dreaming, something thinking. My hands hovered over the controls, but I didn't touch anything. Didn't have to, because whatever was down here, it already knew I was coming. At 3.800 meters, the trench opened beneath me, a black chasm wide enough to swallow cities. The walls were coated in strange ridges, almost neuro-patterned. I know how that sounds, but I'm telling you, it looked textured like a brain. Folds upon folds, like grey matter, frozen in rock. I descended further, and the sonar signal changed, now responding before I pinged. Like it was anticipating me, mapping my descent. And then it hit me. Godzilla wasn't moving. He was still, but his brain, it was awake, radiating impulses not from muscle twitches or tail flicks, but from some inner engine of cognition. It was broadcasting, not to the surface, to something below. Quick aside. Did you know jellyfish don't have brains? Yet they can remember patterns and change behavior. That means they have distributed intelligence, a kind of neural mesh spread throughout their bodies. Some scientists believe this is older than centralized brains like ours. It's primitive, but weirdly effective. What if Godzilla's brain was the opposite? Not primitive, not scattered, but centralized in such a way that it controlled mass, with a cognitive gravity so strong it pulled other lifeforms into orbit. Not with commands, with presence. At 4.000 meters, the trench narrowed. My sub's lights caught something below, a slow, bioluminescent pulse. Blue, then gold, then red. Not fish, not lava, a glow pulsing like breath. But it wasn't coming from lungs. It was coming from a cortex. Godzilla's brain, I realized, wasn't just alive, it was active, and I was watching its electrical field manifest in real time. Neurons firing across titanic hemispheres buried under basalt and saltwater. His skull was partially visible through the dust, bigger than a jetliner. Cradled in trench walls like a sleeping leviathan's crown. And in that moment, I felt it again, that hum, this time with images, flashes, a sinking battleship, screaming men, fire on the water, something breaking the surface like a god spearing into the sky. I wasn't dreaming, I was being shown. Godzilla was remembering, or rather, he was sharing. My body locked up in the cockpit, muscles frozen, breath shallow. It wasn't fear, it was immersion, like being dropped into someone else's memory. Except the someone was a force of nature, and the memory was of rage. I heard a whisper, not sound, but sensation, you are not predator. And suddenly, I wasn't, I was prey, but not in a violent way. No lunging, no attacks, more like how a lion observes a mouse. Curious, detached. Have you ever heard of the Turritopsis dorni? It's a jellyfish nicknamed the Immortal One. When stressed, it reverts to its earlier state and begins life anew. Over and over, that biological cheat code, it's real, and it made me wonder, if a jellyfish could manipulate its own age, what could something like Godzilla do to its mind? Could it store memories for centuries, create emotional archives, predict behavior based on ancient precedent? I looked back at the scanner. The readings made no sense. The brain waves weren't in alpha, beta, or delta range. They were something else entirely, harmonic, like an orchestra tuning to a forgotten key. The field expanded outward, pinging across oceanic fault lines like sonar prayers. Not just thinking, searching, and then came the twist. A faint echo returned, not from me, from something else, something lower in the trench. And that's when I knew, Godzilla wasn't alone in his thoughts. His brain wasn't just active, it was communicating. With what? I didn't know yet, but it hit me then. Godzilla's intelligence wasn't linear. It wasn't strategic in a human sense. It was more like spatial sentience, a mind that operated across time, instinct, memory, and bioelectric resonance. I could hear the words of an old Japanese fisherman in my head. Something he once said while drunk on plum wine. The earth dreams in scales and fire. Sometimes, the dreams remember us. That line didn't make sense when I heard it in a Tokyo bar. Now, I couldn't forget it. I stared at the brain, still pulsing, buried in the black, and I whispered something stupid. Something human. Can you hear me? The trench didn't answer, but the pulse slowed, and the temperature dropped, and every light on my sub flickered once. Then died. You'd think the scariest thing is being surrounded by crushing darkness at the bottom of the sea with no power. And yeah, that's terrifying, until you realize what's worse. Stillness. The kind where nothing creaks. Nothing bubbles. Not even your heartbeat wants to make noise. That's what I sat in. Frozen. A mile under the surface with my sub dead and my thoughts screaming. I couldn't breathe, not because of panic, but because something outside didn't want me to. I'd always laughed at the idea of psychic influence. You know, mind control, telepathic pulses, all that sci-fi nonsense. But in that moment, I understood why people believed in it. Because I felt it, not as words, as pressure, on my thoughts, like someone, or something, was browsing through them. The lights sputtered back to life about 2 minutes later. But that silence, it stayed with me. That sense that something had reached into my skull, rummaged around, and decided I wasn't a threat. Or worse, wasn't worth the effort. Now, listen to this. Ever heard of the mantis shrimp? Yeah, the little guy with punchy claws. It has 16 types of photoreceptors. Compared to our 3, that means it sees colors we don't even have names for. Imagine if a brain like Godzilla's had the equivalent, only with senses. What if he thinks in dimensions we can't perceive? Ideas so layered and massive, our minds can barely comprehend them. Back to the trench. My sub started responding again. Slowly, a trickle of power, enough to hover. I didn't dare descend further. But I also couldn't rise. Not yet, because something had changed. The pulse I'd felt earlier, it was now a rhythm. Intentional, like a thought being practiced. Like an idea forming and reforming inside the skull of a giant dreaming in slow motion. I rotated the sub to scan the surrounding trench. And what I saw next made me drop my thermos of cold coffee all over the console. It was a neural map. Not theoretical, not metaphorical, a literal, glowing imprint of thought, like synapses in stone. Stretching across the walls of the trench were branching lines. Veins of light pulsing outward like neurons firing across a brain. Except this wasn't a brain. This was the earth. And suddenly, I had a thought so terrifying I nearly laughed out loud. What if Godzilla's brain isn't just inside his head? What if it's inside the planet? Like, rooted, synced, like certain fungi that connect entire forests underground. Only his neurons are made of tectonic memory and living radiation. That's when my dream started. Except I was awake. Call it a trance, a neural feedback loop, or just madness, but I was in it. My eyes were open, but I wasn't seeing the sub anymore. I was seeing, get this, a battlefield. An ancient one, water boiling, the sky cracked open, a silhouette the size of a mountain hurling itself at another even larger shape. 2 titans. One of them I knew, Godzilla. The other, I couldn't name, but I felt its hunger. It was a memory, or a message, maybe both. And in that scene, Godzilla wasn't just fighting, he was calculating, dodging, redirecting, timing attacks based on leverage, angles, even water density. It wasn't rage. It was warfare with strategy. That was the moment I stopped seeing Godzilla as a monster, and started seeing him as a mind. Let me toss something academic at you. There's an ongoing debate in neuroscience called the embodied cognition argument. It basically says that intelligence isn't just in the brain, it's distributed through the body. Through interaction with the world. Now imagine a being like Godzilla, whose entire environment is part of his thinking process. Ocean currents, tectonic vibrations, electromagnetic waves, all processed like input. He doesn't react, he absorbs. I snapped out of the trance when the sonar beeped again. Something else was moving nearby. Not swimming, shifting. I turned the lights outward. And there, behind a ridge, was an eye. Not a full body, just the eye. It blinked once, horizontally, like a reptile, and then, slowly, slid back into the stone, as if it had never been there. A passive watcher, or maybe a part of him. I backed the sub away slowly. I wasn't afraid of being eaten. I was afraid of being understood. Like I'd revealed too much just by being there. There's this offbeat fact I remember from a trivia night ages ago. Octopuses have neurons in their arms. Like thousands. Their limbs think independently. So even when an octopus decides something, part of it is acting before the brain even catches up. What if that's Godzilla? Not a monster with a central brain, but a distributed intelligence masquerading as a creature. By the time I rose to the surface, if I even call it that, I knew one thing for sure. Godzilla wasn't a beast. He was a system. A thinking, sleeping, calculating system. And for the first time in my life, I wondered, what if all these years, we haven't been observing him? What if he's been studying us? You ever wake up and not know whether you're dreaming or drowning? That was me the next morning. If you can even call it morning in the middle of the Pacific where time feels like it's slipping between your fingers like salt water. I'd somehow made it back to the surface in the sub. Don't ask me how. I don't remember the ascent. 1 minute, I was staring into that trench, into what felt like the folds of a mind so massive it dwarfed continents, and the next, I was face up on the deck of the trawler, clothes soaked, lips cracked, and my fingertips twitching with leftover static. I felt wired, like I'd touched a battery the size of a city. But also, let me say this without sounding completely insane, I felt watched. Not in a paranoid way, more like how a scientist watches a lab rat. Curiously, patiently, with interest, but no urgency. And if you've ever been on the wrong end of curiosity that doesn't blink, you know exactly how terrifying that can be. So I did what any person trying to convince themselves they're still sane would do. I checked the data. I pulled the black box from the sub, downloaded the logs, and what I found wasn't just sonar returns, or video feeds, or environmental stats. It was patterns, symmetrical ones, repeating across frequency bands, almost like musical scales, but not notes, thoughts too big for a mouth to say or a brain like ours to hold. The rhythm, those pulses, I saw now that they weren't random. They mirrored cognitive patterns, specifically, thalamic relay sequences. Yeah, the part of our brain that acts like a switchboard for sensory information. In short, it looked like Godzilla's brain was filtering data, actively prioritizing information. Just like we do when we focus on a conversation in a loud room. That alone would have melted my old professor's bifocals. But then came the kicker. The pulse pattern had changed after my descent. It had adapted to my presence. Faster, more frequent bursts, like it was anticipating my thoughts. I couldn't breathe for a full 30 seconds. Because that's not a reflex. That's learning. By the way, here's a bizarre little fact for you. Pigeons can be trained to recognize individual people. Seriously, facial recognition. And they can pass that knowledge generationally. Their offspring remember who to avoid. Now multiply that by 1 billion. Give it the processing power of a nuclear grid. And make it aquatic. That's what we're dealing with here. I reached out to an old mnemonic contact, Dr. Jules Enders. The kind of guy who sleeps 4 hours a week and thinks quantum mechanics are a little too simple. He agreed to meet on a secure line. And let me tell you, when he raised his eyebrows at the data, I knew I wasn't just being dramatic. Do you know what this means? He asked. No, I lied. He leaned closer to the screen. This is cerebral targeting. You don't get that from instinct. You get that from directed neural cognition. This thing's not just alive. It's thinking in sequences. That's language level behavior. I asked him, point blank, are you saying Godzilla's brain might be smarter than us? He didn't even blink. Smarter? No, not in a linear IQ sense. But cognitively deeper, like comparing a paperclip to a black hole. Different tools for different problems. He paused, and frankly, I don't think it sees us as a problem. Yet. That word hit harder than it should have. Because if you follow the logic, you land in a scary place. If Godzilla is that smart, then every time he's destroyed a city, it wasn't collateral damage. It was chosen, not with malice, but with intention. We don't call tsunamis evil. But if a tsunami could choose where to hit, that's a god. And Godzilla, this impossible mythic titan rising from the sea again and again, isn't a monster. He's a cerebral force, a thinking ecosystem, a sentient judgment. I remember something my grandfather once said when we were watching ants crawl across a picnic bench. They don't know we're watching them. But we decide who gets stepped on. At the time, I thought it was cruel. Now, I think it might have been prophetic. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I stared out at the ocean. And then something happened that still gives me chills to this day. The water glowed, not like bioluminescent plankton, not blue, but green, radiant, emerald pulses forming a circle around the boat. No sound, just light, shimmering in silence like a crown made of radioactivity. And then I felt it again. That presence. He was down there, not angry, just aware that I was aware. And in that moment, I realized something. We hadn't discovered Godzilla. He'd allowed himself to be found. It's strange how knowing you're being watched makes you act differently. Like suddenly every breath feels too loud. Every blink takes too long. That's what the next few days felt like. I didn't sleep. I barely ate. I ran tests on repeat. Not because I needed results. I already had them. But because I was trying to convince myself I still had control. Spoiler, I didn't. By day 3, the ocean had calmed to the point of being wrong. Not peaceful, muted, like someone had hit a pause button on nature. The gulls were gone, no fish pinged on sonar. Even the waves stopped slapping the hull with the usual rhythm. It was as if the sea itself was holding its breath. That's when the dreams started. They didn't feel like dreams, more like downloads, memories, forced through my head like flash drives jammed into the wrong port. I'd close my eyes and suddenly I'd be somewhere ancient. Underwater caverns filled with bioluminescent murals, no, imprints, shapes etched into coral, each glowing with its own pulse. Some of the murals, they moved. Not literally, but they felt alive, like the memories of a creature too big for time, replaying through someone else's neurons, mine. And in every dream, Godzilla stood at the center. Not just roaring, not just fighting, watching, observing other titans, measuring them, gauging outcomes, retreating when needed, pressing forward when necessary, each act not emotional, but calculated. That's when the recurring image began. A storm, but not from the sky. From him. Electric arcs bursting from his spine like lightning-made flesh. His dorsal plates, those jagged, iconic spines, weren't armor. They were conductors, organic lightning rods engineered to channel bioelectric surges. Not just as weapons, as sensors. Think about electric eels. They generate voltage to hunt. Sure, but they also sense their environment through those currents. Navigation, communication, emotion. Now scale that up to 400 feet and multiply by atomic breath. That's what I realized. Godzilla's body wasn't just destructive. It was designed. Or maybe, self-designed. That brings me to something that still gives me philosophical whiplash. You know how cephalopods, octopuses, squids, can rewrite their RNA on the fly? It's a biological cheat code. They literally reprogram themselves to adapt to changes in temperature, light, pressure, without evolving over generations. What if Godzilla could do that? What if every battle wasn't just survival, but an opportunity to improve? To learn, to remember. And, hear me out, what if he remembers everything? Think of the implications. We don't know how old he is. But if he's been around since the Permian extinction, like some mnemonic scientists speculate, he's survived not one, but 5 mass extinction events. Each time, he learned. Each time, he adapted. And each time, when he went silent again, he took those memories with him. But why now? Why surface again in our time? That's when I remembered something an old linguistics professor told me after I submitted a paper on pre-linguistic cognition. The most powerful language in the universe is pattern recognition. What if Godzilla doesn't think in sentences or thoughts like we do, but in patterns? And we're repeating one. Nuclear tension, pollution, ecosystem collapse, loud signals. If you're tuned in, maybe he is. Maybe, we're the anomaly he was waiting for. Back on the boat, I hooked up EEG monitors to myself during sleep, trying to measure what my brain did during those dreams. What I found was unsettling. Every night, as the dreams intensified, my brain entered a hybrid wave state. Gamma plus delta. That's focus and deep sleep. At the same time, you know what else exhibits that pattern? Meditating monks. Which led me to a theory so absurd, I almost deleted it from my notes. What if Godzilla's long disappearances aren't hibernation? What if they're meditation, processing, sorting memories, scanning the world through bioelectrical feelers spread across the ocean? And when he emerges, it's because he's made a decision. What I experienced next confirmed it. Because the dream changed. No longer passive memories. Now it was a message. I stood, not underwater this time, but on a scorched field. The air was thick with dust. heavy with radiation, and there he was, Godzilla, not rampaging, not roaring, just standing, looking at me, and without speaking, without moving. I knew what he was thinking. You are repeating the pattern. Again. And I woke up screaming. The laptop was fried. The boat's radio, dead. But on my tablet, a single line of text in a blank document. The storm is the signal. I didn't write that. No one else could have. And yet, there it was. A warning. Or maybe a verdict I don't scare easily. I mean, I've waded through Amazon rivers with leeches the size of my thumb. Once got caught in an ice storm in Mongolia with nothing but a thermal blanket and a broken satellite phone. But this was different. This wasn't survival against nature. This was realizing nature had a mind, and it was judging us. After the dream and that ominous message, the storm is the signal, I did the only thing I could think of. I went back into the logs. Not just mine, Monarch's. Let's just say there are back doors. And I know a guy who still owes me for a time I bailed him out of a Beijing data sweep. And what I found? Godzilla's activity over the last 70 years was not random. Each appearance corresponded with a critical human threshold event. Bikini Atoll, Chernobyl, Fukushima, kaiju incidents near oil rigs. Even sonar disruptions during deep-sea mining tests off Guam. Every time we crossed a new ecological or technological line, he surfaced, not always to attack, sometimes just to watch, like a guardian or a judge. And the scary part, his reactions were proportional. Small incursions got warnings. Bigger ones, well, we've seen the footage. Cities crumble, monsters fall, but humanity always assumes he's defending territory. What if he's defending a pattern? Or trying to prevent its repetition? It reminds me of an old tale from the Maori people. They believed certain sea gods didn't just rule the waters, but listened to them. And when the tides became angry, it wasn't nature, it was divine correction. That concept kept buzzing in my mind. Because when I returned to the sub to run a few low-level pings, something new happened. Godzilla responded. Not with sound, not with light, but with dreams. Yeah, again, but different. This time I wasn't passive. I was inside his memories. I stood on an ocean floor-turned battlefield. The skeletons of creatures I couldn't name lay half buried in ash and silt. And above it all, rising like a skyscraper sculpted from living muscle and rage, he stood. But this time, he wasn't looking at me. He was looking through me. And behind me was another version of Earth. No humans, no cities, just balance. I realized something then. These dreams, they weren't just visions. They were models, simulations. Projections from a mind that had spent millennia observing the planet's fluctuations. Storing every ecological shift, every predator-prey pattern, every species collapse. Godzilla's brain wasn't just vast. It was predictive, like a living quantum computer running scenarios of the future, and deciding, in real time, when to intervene. Now here's something offbeat you might appreciate. Cicadas have life cycles of 13 or 17 years, prime numbers, to avoid syncing up with predators. Mathematicians believe this is intentional evolutionary math. Nature doing calculus to survive. So if a bug can math its way out of extinction, why is it so hard to imagine Godzilla, whose brain pulses across tectonic lines and bioelectric fields, doing the same? Better, smarter, faster. The dreams kept coming. One night, I saw a storm, a real one. It wasn't metaphor anymore. Lightning ripped through skies over Tokyo. Sirens howled. In the harbor, something stirred. Godzilla, rising, not angry, alert. Then I saw us, humans, drilling, burning, blasting signals into the earth trying to find rare minerals in places not meant to be touched. And then, his roar. But not at us, at the sky. That was the moment I understood the message. The storm is the signal. It wasn't a warning about a weather event. It was a warning about behavior. Our behavior. Storms in nature often follow disturbance. You heat the ocean, hurricanes come. You stir the soil, sinkholes form. You fracture the balance, something ancient notices. Godzilla wasn't the storm, we were. And he was the signal against it. So many have asked over the decades, why doesn't he wipe us out? Why let us rebuild? I think the answer is chilling. He's giving us chances. Like a teacher watching a student fail the same test over and over. Eventually, he stops grading. Eventually, he closes the book. And does what needs to be done. That's why he waits. That's why he sleeps. Because he doesn't want to intervene. But he will. The dreams showed me one final thing that night. A shape on the horizon. Bigger than anything I'd ever seen. Burning. Crawling. Unnatural. And Godzilla didn't face it with fury. He faced it with resignation. Like it had come before. And would come again. And that if we couldn't stop it, he would. Even if it meant erasing the cause. Even if it meant erasing us by now. I'd stopped pretending I was running a scientific expedition. This was something else. I wasn't researching anymore. I was witnessing. Listening. Dreaming someone else's memories. Someone older than civilization. Older than our species. And when I say, someone, I mean it in the most literal way I can. Because if Godzilla has a brain, and we've confirmed that much, then that brain has intentions. And that's what terrified me. Not his strength, not even his size, but that he might be deliberate. The next step was obvious. At least to me, I had to understand how his brain worked. Not just biologically, but functionally. So I started digging into frequency recordings I'd captured from earlier dives. And in that pile of seismic noise, I found something buried deep. Repeating waveforms. Predictable patterns. Godzilla's mind, it turned out, doesn't function like ours. No linear thoughts. No stop-start logic chains. His cognition is cyclical. Like tides. Like orbits. Thought that repeats. But evolves, each time adding nuance. Each time responding to new variables. Which led me to a theory I could barely say out loud without feeling ridiculous. Godzilla thinks in echoes. That is, every thought isn't just a new signal. It's a resonance of an older one. Bouncing back slightly altered, slightly wiser. Imagine if every decision you made was based not on impulse, but on the refined memory of 1,000 previous versions of that decision. Now multiply that across millions of years. Godzilla doesn't just remember, he iterates. And I know how crazy this sounds. But stick with me. There's a phenomenon in neurobiology called reverberating circuits, when neurons fire in a loop, allowing for short-term memory without constant input. It's how your brain keeps a phone number in mind long enough to dial it, even if you forget it 10 minutes later. Now imagine a reverberating circuit the size of a mountain range. That's the energy I saw inside the trench. But here's where it gets weirder. I started comparing the waveform patterns to something I remembered from my brief time studying whale songs back in grad school. Those deep, rhythmic pulses that blue whales used to communicate across entire oceans. Yeah, Godzilla's frequencies had structure just like that. Not random noise, but syntax. That led me to an abandoned monic base, one of the old underwater outposts built back when they still believed they could control what they found. I had to cut my way in. Seal broken bulkheads with duct tape and hope the rusted hatches held long enough. Inside, I found it. Old acoustic mapping data. Years worth of recordings of Godzilla's vocalizations. Analyzed by eye. Cross-referenced with seismic patterns and global environmental shifts. And the conclusion? Each roar corresponded with a unique pattern of emotional resonance. Not just a threat display. Not just a warning. But something closer to emotional language. Fear. Territory. Recognition. Sadness. I swear, one recording, captured after a skirmish with another titan, sounded mournful. Low and sustained, not aggressive, grieving. That's when it hit me. Godzilla wasn't a destroyer. He was a survivor, and like all survivors, he carried loss, trauma, memory. And that memory wasn't buried in the past. It shaped his behavior. Let's take a moment to wander into something weird and wonderful. There's a bird in New Guinea called the lyrebird that can mimic any sound it hears, even chainsaws and camera shutters. Why? Scientists believe it's a kind of sonic evolution, a way of proving intelligence or dominance through imitation. So imagine a being that not only stores memories, but echoes them, amplifies them, responds not with language but with patterned sound, roars that mean something. He's not just calling out, he's remembering out loud. At one point in the monic files, I found a term repeated over and over: bioacoustic cognition. The belief that Godzilla's brain is linked to his sound production, that his roars are as much a part of his thinking as they are of his body. Think of it like this: we think in words, then speak. Godzilla thinks by speaking. His thoughts are his roars. His feelings are vibrations across the seabed. His language is a chorus of seismic song. And suddenly, everything made sense. Why the water glowed before he appeared. Why the dreams came in waves. Why I felt inside something, rather than near it. I wasn't just observing his brain. I was inside the echo of one of his thoughts. Just one. And it was enough to haunt me. You see, that's the danger we've never considered. Not that Godzilla will attack, but that we will keep ignoring him. That we'll mistake every signal for noise, every roar for rage, every storm for coincidence. And one day, we'll miss the last echo. The one that comes not from warning, but from decision. You know what's funny? Somewhere along the line, I stopped wondering if Godzilla was intelligent and started asking how far ahead he was thinking. And that's when I realized I'd missed the real question. Not how smart is he, but what kind of smart? We've got this human obsession with measuring intelligence by test scores, pattern matching, language use, but that's our box. Godzilla doesn't live in that box. He crushes it, literally and conceptually. I started digging deeper, no pun intended, into something Monic labeled the resonance language hypothesis. According to their buried reports, Godzilla's vocal and seismic patterns had predictive components. They weren't just reactions, they were preparations. Now here's where it gets freaky. The hypothesis wasn't built on just sound. It factored in electromagnetic fields, tectonic shifts, and even migratory patterns of sea life. In other words, Godzilla thinks using the entire Earth as a sensory matrix. His brain, just the node. The planet, that's the interface. Ever heard of the concept of geosentience? It's the idea that certain life forms are so massive, so interconnected with their environments, that they function more like ecosystems than individuals. That's where Godzilla fits, not a being walking on the Earth, but a part of it, a limb, a neural extension. And once I saw that, everything shifted. I went back to the sonar pulses I'd recorded during the second dive. One frequency stood out, low, nearly infrasonic, barely audible even after amplification. But the waveform looked familiar. I didn't know from where, until I ran it through an old deep learning model trained on ancient whale song. The AI flagged it as recursive harmonic patterning, which, in normal language, means this wasn't just noise. It was structured reflection, like a melody repeating itself with slight variations. Like jazz but cosmic. And that's when the dreams changed again. I wasn't underwater this time. I was inside a cavern, organic, alive. The walls pulsed like lungs, lit by bioluminescent veins. In the center, a column of pure energy, like a spinal cord made of lightning. And wrapped around it, massive, slow, watchful, was Godzilla. But he wasn't moving. He was breathing with the earth. And every breath carried memories. Whole civilizations, whole extinctions. And I understood something I'll never be able to explain properly. Godzilla remembers the world we've forgotten. The original world, the one before us, before our machines, before our noise. A world where everything had a rhythm we've disrupted. Now, not to derail this with trivia, but did you know that elephants can detect thunderstorms from hundreds of miles away through their feet? They sense subsonic rumbles in the earth and move long before the clouds appear. That's not just instinct, that's tuned intelligence. So what is Godzilla, if not the ultimate version of that? He doesn't think in numbers or maps. He feels the fault lines shifting, the chemical scent of coral bleaching, the pulse of reactor cores leaking heat into tectonic seams. And when those rhythms go offbeat, he moves. I ran one last analysis that night, comparing Godzilla's energy spikes with global seismic activity. And I found something I didn't expect. Not only did his movements match quake clusters, but in some cases, his pulses came before the earthquakes. He wasn't responding, he was predicting, no, preventing. Which led me to a single, terrifying realization. Godzilla isn't just intelligent, he's predictive. He's actively maintaining some kind of planetary balance. And we keep messing with his math. Every drill, every detonation, every sonar blast. It's like static in a symphony he's been listening to for eons. And eventually, when the static gets too loud, when the rhythm breaks beyond repair, he doesn't lash out, he doesn't go rogue, he corrects. Because correction, in his logic, is not punishment, it's maintenance. We keep calling him king of the monsters. But I think we're wrong. He's not the king, he's the conductor, and we're the orchestra that can't stop playing the wrong notes. Sooner or later, he's going to cut the music. You ever get the feeling that the more you learn, the less you want to know? That's how I felt waking up the next morning, curled in a blanket of aluminum insulation on the deck of the trawler. Brain throbbing like it had run a marathon in my sleep. I didn't even remember going to bed. One minute I was watching sonar scans loop over and over. The next, boom, dream sequence again. This time it wasn't just visions. It was tactile. I could feel the ocean like a second skin. Its heat, its weight, its memory, like I'd been plugged directly into the nervous system of the planet. I know that sounds insane, but that's the thing with knowledge, sometimes it arrives too big for your skull. You can't think it, you have to feel it. And I felt Godzilla, not as a monster, not even as a guardian, but as a mind, coiled through the ocean, threaded into magma, humming through the crust like a second heartbeat of Earth. I looked through my notes that morning and noticed something new. An entry I didn't remember writing. The king has no court, only calculations. Now, I don't talk in riddles. Not unless I'm sleep-deprived and overcaffeinated. But this wasn't mine, or at least, it didn't feel like mine. More like something I transcribed while dreaming. Godzilla's thoughts weren't poetic, but they were symbolic. Not language as we know it, more like archetypes. Feelings shaped into impressions, like dreams made of thunder. And one of those impressions was about hierarchy. We've always assumed he's the alpha predator, top of the food chain. But what if that's wrong? What if he doesn't rule? What if he remembers? There's a difference. Ruling means you're trying to dominate. Remembering means you're trying to preserve. And that's what I started seeing in those dreams, scenes not of dominance, but balance. Creatures bigger than skyscrapers coexisting. Roaming. Rituals of intimidation without violence. Whole ecosystems of giants, titans. And then, the signal. Always the signal. Bright, wrong, artificial, human. That's when the war would begin. Not between titans. Between the old world and the new interference. Us. We never even knew we were trespassing. And Godzilla, he never gave warnings in words. He gave lessons. Roars, waves, fire, and silence. Sometimes silence is the cruelest teacher. Back at the base, I reviewed old Monarch footage, archived attacks, intercepted patterns, behavioral logs. The more I watched, the clearer it became. Godzilla adapts. His tactics change. His opening moves vary. His response time shortens with each engagement. He's not just brawling. He's learning. Take the Battle of San Francisco. Watch the footage. He uses tail strikes only when cornered. But during later events, Boston, Tokyo, those same tactics became preemptive. Calculated. Efficient. A playbook developing in real time. Like a predator with perfect recall. Here's something wild to chew on. Corvids, yes. Crows can remember individual human faces for years. They pass those memories down to other birds. It's called transgenerational recognition. So even after you're gone, your actions are remembered by creatures that never even saw you. Now, scale that memory up, feed it with radiation, wrap it in armor. That's Godzilla. He doesn't just remember his enemies. He remembers ours. He fights echoes. And if we're not careful, we become one. Later that day, I ran a final scan over the trench. The electromagnetic pulse I detected was stronger than anything I'd seen so far. But it wasn't Godzilla. It was empty. Like something had left. A void. A gap in the symphony. And that terrified me more than anything. Because if his mind was no longer there, if the echo had gone quiet, it meant he'd moved. Which meant, a decision had been made. I sat on the deck that night, watching a lightning storm curl over the horizon like a fist. The air smelled like iron and ozone. The waves rolled heavy, slow, like the ocean itself was trying to remember how to breathe. And that's when I knew. We weren't waiting on him. He was waiting on us. And time was up. The storm hit harder than I expected. It wasn't a weather storm. Not really. There was lightning. Yes, ripping sideways across the sky like it had somewhere specific to be. Thunder that rolled low and angry, like the earth was clearing its throat. But the storm I'm talking about wasn't in the clouds. It was in the water. The ocean didn't churn. It vibrated. You ever seen sound travel through a glass of water? Ripples. Perfect and concentric. Now imagine the entire Pacific doing that. As if some massive speaker beneath the trench had turned on and started broadcasting. That night, the entire hull of the boat shook, not from waves, but from resonance. Like a tuning fork had been struck inside the ocean itself. I staggered out onto the deck, half expecting to see the sky tear open. And in a way, it had, because something was rising, far off the port bow. Water surged in unnatural directions. Not up, not down, away, pushed aside like a curtain. And in the center, framed by lightning and silence, rose a shape I'd seen in dreams but never with eyes open. Godzilla. But not roaring, not glowing, just present. It was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. Not because of the teeth. Because of the stillness. He stood in the water like a monument. A totem from another world. Every dorsal plate catching light like jagged obsidian. And his eyes, they didn't scan. They focused. On me. On us. You want to know the scariest thing a giant ancient apex predator can do? Nothing. Because nothing means he's waiting. Calculating. And that's what I realized in that moment. This wasn't a reaction. It was a demonstration. A reminder. A warning that didn't need words. But I still tried. I stumbled to the comms station and triggered the sonar broadcast, pinging the sequence I'd mapped from his brainwaves. It was risky, I know, like trying to talk to a hurricane using Morse code. But he responded. Not with a roar, not with movement, but with frequency. My equipment lit up, screens flaring with waveforms too complex to be natural. Layered, harmonic, intelligent. The pulses weren't random, they had spacing, rhythm, inflection. It was language, not ours, but unmistakably structured, like chords played on an alien organ, vibrating across tectonic plates. And then came the dream. Yes, again, but this one wasn't like the others. This one hurt. I was underwater, drowning, not from lack of air, but from information. Images flooded me, memories that weren't mine. Cities falling, creatures rising, oceans red with extinction, not as prophecy, as history. The extinction of the first titans. Not from ice, or meteor, but from imbalance. One species rising too fast, consuming too much, breaking the rhythm. And that species wasn't human, but we were close enough. Godzilla had seen this before. And in that moment, I understood. We weren't special. We were familiar. And so was our trajectory. The dream shifted again. I stood alone on a cliff overlooking a barren sea. Godzilla below, silent, glowing dimly like a fading star. And he looked up, not at me. At the sky. At something coming. Something worse. That's when I felt it. His fear. Not for himself. For the Earth. Because if we couldn't fix the pattern, if we couldn't correct the disharmony, then the conductor would stop the music by any means necessary. And we might not be the biggest threat, but we'd be the first correction. Did you know that when bees sense their hive is failing, they'll start buzzing in a specific rhythm, called the death song? It's not to panic the colony. It's to signal acceptance, a kind of evolutionary resignation. That's what Godzilla's pulse felt like. A death song. Not for himself. For us. He turned then, slowly, with the weight of continents, and began to sink beneath the waves. Dorsal plates flickering like the last beats of a fading drum. No sound. No attack. Just a signal. And as he disappeared, the water stilled. And so did the storm. I stood there for hours, waiting for the next dream. But none came. Only one final sonar return. Brief. Quiet. Deliberate. A single frequency. One I recognized immediately. It was the same pattern as a human brain's theta wave. The kind we emit when we're dreaming. Which means, he hadn't gone to war. He'd gone back to sleep. And the question that now haunts me isn't when he'll wake again. It's whether, next time, he'll bother to warn us at all. Sleep doesn't feel the same anymore. Not after that last dream. I don't just close my eyes now. I fall through them. Into the depths. Into him. It's like Godzilla left a key behind in my brain. Or maybe a door. And now, whenever I drift off, I step through it. Not willingly. Not unwillingly. Just, inevitably. That night, after he sank beneath the waves, I expected nothing. I thought the visions would end. But instead, I found myself in a chamber. No walls. No floor. Just pressure and memory and presence. He was there, of course. Not physically, but completely. And this time, he spoke. Not in words, not in language, but in feelings arranged like sentences. Regret, memory, duty. Images flared in sequence, faster this time. Not just of the past, but of me, us. He had been watching, not just the surface of the world but the people who thought they owned it. Our wars, our reactors, our satellites, digging where we shouldn't, listening where we couldn't understand. Each act logged in his mind like music played out of tune. I felt his judgment, but not hatred. There was no rage, only inevitability. That's when I saw something that made me want to crawl out of my own skin. I saw another Godzilla, taller, leaner, spines more jagged, more flame than bone, and it wasn't from the past. It was from a possible future, a fork in the road. This version wasn't contemplative. He was reactive, furious, unbound, burning with evolution, not earned, but forced. A Godzilla pushed by us to become something he wasn't meant to be. And I realized, this mind, the one I was inside, wasn't just analyzing. It was arguing with itself. Because Godzilla, in his silence, carried a conflict deeper than any roar. To change, or to remain. And we were the variable tipping the scale. I woke up gasping, half frozen, lying on the steel deck as the ocean steamed around me. The instruments were dead again. All but one. The M receiver was still ticking. Recording. I played back the last captured signal. It wasn't a pulse. It wasn't a roar. It was music. Low, harmonic vibrations across the seabed. A song. Maybe the first one Earth had ever heard. A lullaby. Or maybe a warning in a form we'd never bothered to translate. You know, in Navajo tradition, stories aren't just tales. They're living instructions. Carried from generation to generation. Lessons embedded in myth. What if that's what Godzilla was doing? Embedding a story in the earth. One we'd ignored. But now, we were inside it. And we didn't know the ending. Later, I sat with the old logs, data packets from Monarch, audio fragments from submersibles, decayed files corrupted by time and fear. And in one of them, a classified memo never meant for public eyes, I found a line that made my chest lock up. The specimen appears to operate on a moral code based in ecological memory. Destruction occurs not from instinct, but from a perceived rupture in biological order. That's it. That's the whole thing. He isn't chaos. He's correction. Like antibodies flooding to infection. Not because they hate the virus. Because they must. And I'm beginning to wonder if we ever had a chance to live outside that equation. If our rise was a glitch. Or if our end was the balance setting itself right. Because here's the part one haven't said yet. I'm not the only one dreaming now. People all over the Pacific Rim, fishermen, researchers, divers, have started reporting the same visions. They describe caverns, pulses, eyes the size of ships, memories they couldn't possibly know. Godzilla's thoughts are leaking. Or maybe, he's sharing. Not to scare, but to prepare. What for? I don't know. But I feel it, like a current in my blood. Something's coming, and Godzilla knows. And if he is afraid, then maybe we should be. Too, by this point, I wasn't even pretending to be objective anymore. I wasn't a researcher, or a scientist, or a man with theories. I was a vessel, for memories not mine. For warnings whispered in tectonic language. For something vast and ancient and impossibly aware. And the weirdest part, it started to feel normal. Each night, the dreams deepened. I wasn't just in Godzilla's mind anymore. I was moving through it. It was a labyrinth of memory and instinct. Not organized like a human brain. Not even like an animal's. More like a library carved into the ocean floor. Shelves made of stone. Corridors of bioluminescent neurons stretching for miles. You don't read a book in Godzilla's brain. You experience it. And what I experienced that night was the memory of first contact. Not between us and him. Between him and them. Other titans. Some of them I recognized. Mothra. Kong. Behemoth. But others were lost to time. Hulking creatures made of living roots. Winged serpents with thunder in their bones. One, a quadruped of obsidian plates and molten eyes, made me wake up choking on air. They didn't speak, but they communicated. Through resonance. Through empathy. That's what floored me. These weren't monsters driven by hunger. They were connected. Through emotion. Through instinct. Through memory passed across generations, not with DNA, but with frequency. Their social structure wasn't dominance-based like ours. It was resonance-based. Titans that harmonized, coexisted. Titans that clashed, dissonated. And Godzilla, he was the center frequency. The node, the tuner, the one they aligned to, or fought against. The dreams showed me the first time he roared. Not out of rage, but out of grief. The extinction of an ancient titan. One that held balance between land and sea. It died because of a volcanic shift accelerated by a comet impact. Godzilla felt it all, and in that pain, something happened in his brain. It changed, not just chemically, structurally. His neural networks adapted, began processing time differently. He started anticipating loss before it occurred. That was the birth of his cognition, of his intelligence, not from competition, from trauma. And doesn't that hit a little too close to home? How many of us only begin to think, really think, after we've lost something? You want an offbeat fact? In jellyfish, pain doesn't register as it does in vertebrates. But they still respond to damage. Their reflexes change permanently. Now imagine pain as the first spark of consciousness. Imagine a mind forged not in growth, but in grief. And that brings us to the present. Because that same pattern, it's happening again. The oceans are acidifying. Coral is dying. Whale migration has fractured. Nuclear signatures have doubled in the trench zones. And Godzilla? He hasn't roared. Not yet. But the signal's growing. And this time, it doesn't feel like a warning. It feels like a countdown. I checked seismic data from the last 2 months. 4 major underwater rumbles. All in patterns that mimic pre-breach energy from Titan emergence. Except no Titans showed up. You know what that means? Either they're waiting, or something stronger is holding him back. That something is Godzilla, but holding him back costs him. I saw it in the last dream. His dorsal plates flickered like dying stars. His energy, measured in radiation and electromagnetic fields, was fluctuating. Dipping, not because he was injured, because he was channeling, like a dam about to break, like a guardian resisting instinct. Because when he roars again, it won't be to balance, it will be to cleanse. And here's what keeps me up, long after the hum of the ocean fades and my equipment falls silent. What if we're the only species on this planet arrogant enough to ignore our extinction being forecasted in real time? What if the king of monsters isn't just intelligent, but merciful? And what happens when that mercy runs out? That night, I left the sub, dove into the black water with only a thermal suit and a set of sensor cuffs on my wrists. No lights, no comms, just a question in my heart. Are you still listening? And the ocean answered, not with waves, but with a single pulse. A heartbeat from below, still there, still watching, still weighing our place in the song. And the silence that followed? It wasn't peace. It was decision deferred. There's something you need to understand about silence. It isn't always calm. Sometimes, silence is compression, like the hush before a bomb goes off, or the moment before lightning splits the sky. That's what the ocean felt like now. Not quiet, condensed. And Godzilla, he was at the center of it. The pulse I felt in the water, it didn't fade. It echoed, not outward, but inward, through me, as if testing my emotional bandwidth. Like he was scanning me for intent. And what did he find? A mess. Fear, curiosity, reverence, and deep, unshakable guilt. Because I finally understood something I'd been avoiding since this all began. We don't deserve his forgiveness. We've built weapons powerful enough to split tectonic plates. We've driven thousands of species to extinction. And worse, we've done it without remorse. Godzilla sees that, all of it, and yet, he still holds back. Why? The answer came not in words, but in patterns, the same kind I'd seen dancing across sonar screens. Buried in trench recordings, pulsing in dream echoes, I cross-referenced the frequency with Monix's archives and found something chilling. It matched human fetal EEG patterns. Early-stage brain activity, like he was teaching, trying to communicate, trying to nurture. Let that sink in. The king of monsters might not be waiting to destroy us. He might be hoping we evolve fast enough to understand him before he has to. And if that's not mercy, I don't know what is. There's this old folk belief in the Arctic, when a polar bear doesn't strike. It's not because it's full, it's because it's thinking, measuring whether you belong in its world. That's what Godzilla is doing now. Measuring us, not for threat, but for potential. And if we fail, he's already run the scenarios. And he knows how to end the pattern. I saw it in the next dream. A world after us. No buildings. No cities. Just ocean and silence and beasts that move not to conquer, but to maintain. A return to balance. Not savage. Sacred. And Godzilla? He doesn't rule it. He remembers it. That's his burden. Not kingship. Memory. That's what no one understands. He carries every extinction inside him. Every imbalance. Every roar is a funeral bell. And we keep giving him reasons to ring it. I spent the next 2 days floating offshore, recording nothing but silence. No pulses. No signals. Just calm, which terrified me more than anything. Because that meant he was thinking. Deciding. And I had no way to know which way the scale tipped. Until the sky cracked open. Not with thunder, but with sound. A roar. Low. Measured. Not like the ones you've seen on news footage. This one was different. Not territorial, not aggressive, instructive, like a teacher clapping their hands in front of a sleeping class. And then the readings came in. Tidal shifts, thermal spikes, vibrations in the crust itself. He wasn't just warning us. He was waking the others. I scrambled to the console and pulled up the live satellite feed Monic had thought they'd shut me out from. But I still had access. One by one, across the globe, pulses activated, dormant nests, hidden hollows, unmarked scars in the desert, the forest, the trench, they all responded. The Titans were stirring, because the conductor had tapped his baton. And the orchestra was rising. This isn't about survival anymore. It's about resonance. He gave us time. He gave us signals. He gave us a chance. But now, he's done waiting. I wish I could tell you I handled it like a professional. That when the Titans began to stir, when the old scars of the earth pulsed open like breathing wounds, I remained calm. Rational, scientific. But the truth, I panicked. Not because of what I saw. Because of what I felt. It was everywhere. In the wind. In the wires. In the metal bones of the boat. A pressure. A presence. Like the whole world was finally exhaling after holding its breath for millennia. The ocean shimmered with heat despite the night air. My skin prickled like I was inside a static field. And then I realized, Godzilla wasn't just calling the others. He was linking them, establishing neural harmony through seismic frequency. A planetary network of ancient intelligence reawakening at once. I tried to describe this in my logs. But words failed. It wasn't an army. It wasn't a rebellion. It was a symphony. And Godzilla wasn't marching. He was composing. Each Titan's emergence was timed. Calculated. A node activating in a neural system buried beneath our oceans. Our forests. Our forgotten places. And we were the inflammation. The tumor. The anomaly in an otherwise balanced biological equation. I scanned again, desperate to pinpoint where he'd gone. But the data was wrong. No central source. No core signal. And then it hit me. He wasn't in one place anymore. He was everywhere. Or rather, he'd become something else entirely. Not just a monster. Not even a mind. But a conscious system. His brain wasn't housed in his skull. It was dispersed through the planet's crust. Through the deep-sea networks. Through the biological memories of every Titan rising in response. Godzilla had transcended. He was no longer a creature. He was a protocol, an immune response encoded into Earth itself. And I was still here, still listening, still tethered to the echo. Which brings me to the most terrifying dream yet. It started quietly. A beach, waves gentle, sky pink with dawn, children laughing. And then, the ground moaned. Not shook, not quaked, moaned. Like the earth itself had become aware of its pain. And rising from the sea was not Godzilla, but something new. No spines, no roar, just a massive, featureless shape, draped in heat and salt and memory. And then came the whisper. I was not born, I was made. And I knew then, this wasn't Godzilla, it was what comes after him. What he's been holding back. Containing, suppressing. Something older than Titans, older than balance. Not chaos, not order. Just entropy, a cosmic shrug dressed in flesh. And Godzilla, he was fighting it, alone. Every time he surfaced, every time he destroyed, he was keeping that thing caged. And now he was slipping, not because he was weak, but because he was tired. You know, there's an old parable about the bodhisattva who guards the gates of enlightenment. He refuses to pass through until the last soul is ready. He could leave, he could rest, but he stays, out of love. That's what Godzilla is. Not a monster. Not a savior. A guardian. Trapped in a cycle he didn't choose. Roaring not in rage, but in grief. Because he knows what we don't. What waits behind the roar. And it's coming. There was no dream that night. Just blackness. Total. Pressing. Endless. Like the signal had gone dark. Like the mind that had been feeding me thoughts. Warnings. And memory had closed the door. And yet, I knew that didn't mean it was over. It meant the final phase had begun. I woke up to a sea so calm it made my bones ache. The kind of stillness that isn't peace. It's pause. The moment before a drumbeat. The breath before a scream. And I heard it. Low. Distant. A vibration more than a sound. Godzilla. But not from the trench. Not from the sea. From beneath everything. From within. The pulse wasn't coming from him anymore. It was coming from the Earth itself. He'd finished integrating, finished becoming. The Earth was now his body, the currents his blood, the tectonic plates, his knuckles, the sky, his lung. He wasn't just in sync with the planet. He was the planet's last act of self-preservation. And as I stared out at the horizon, I felt the smallest of tremors tickle the hull. Not enough to worry anyone. But I knew, it was a footstep, from something huge, moving slowly, deliberately. Godzilla wasn't going to surface again. He didn't need to. He had passed beyond that. What I saw that morning on the satellite feed proved it. The polar caps, the deserts, the seafloor, all pulsing with identical resonance. Titans were converging, not on cities, on fault lines, pressure points of the planet. They weren't preparing to destroy. They were preparing to stabilize, to reset the balance, even if it meant drowning coastlines, sinking nations, silencing whole continents, because balance doesn't care about politics, or skyscrapers, or borders. Balance just is. And as I sat there, shivering in sunlight that felt wrong, I realized something I wish I'd never had to think. We were never the main characters in this story. We were the noise. And Godzilla, he was the silence returning. The memory of what Earth once was, and what it could be again. I recorded one final message to Monic, a file they'll probably delete or bury under 15 firewalls. But if anyone ever reads it, it ends like this. We mistook power for brutality, intelligence for instinct, but the king of monsters was neither. He was the last conscience of a living world, and we were the reason it broke. There are no more dreams now, only waiting. Waiting for the sea to part one final time. Waiting for the last roar. Not of war, but of closure. Because the king isn't sleeping anymore. He's remembering. And soon, the world will remember him. Not as a myth, not as a monster, but as a mind, a guardian, a warning. And the last truth we were too small to understand. If you're still here, still listening in the quiet after the storm, then maybe you felt it too. That pull, that hum beneath the noise of everyday life. That suspicion that something ancient, something vast, is watching, not out of fear or hate, but from a place deeper than anything we can name. Godzilla was never just a monster, not a metaphor for war, not a symbol of destruction. He is memory, deep memory, the kind etched not in stories, but in stone and seawater, in the slow grind of tectonic plates, in the roar of thunder under the sea. A being whose intelligence doesn't look like ours, because it doesn't need to. His thoughts aren't linear, they're layered, not simple yes or no commands, but seismic chords echoing through time, shaped by trauma, grief, and a tireless instinct to preserve the rhythm of a world that forgot how to listen. We've spent generations calling him a threat, but maybe, we're the threat he's been forced to tolerate. Maybe all this time, we haven't been trying to understand Godzilla. We've been trying to outrun his patience. And now, as his echo fades into the deep, we have one final choice. Change the pattern, or be remembered only as the last dissonant note in a planet's long, unfinished song. Now turn off your screen, close your eyes, and just listen. Maybe, just maybe, if we're quiet enough, we'll hear him listening too.